This morning is found in the second chapter of Matthew. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, 'And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel.'" Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word, so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out. And there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Two of our four Gospels tell the story of the birth of Christ. And for most of our time in Advent, we have been hearing the story from the Gospel of Luke. It's where babies are in the womb and leaping with excitement and joy. It's where songs of gladness are being sung. And it's even where we get our most important monologue in Western history, when Linus shares the Christmas story with Charlie Brown and the Peanuts. Luke's story is filled with joy, 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 but the Gospel of Matthew is a little different. He gives us a perspective of realism. See, there's no singing in Matthew. There's weeping. Because it seems as if when joy was being born into the world, fear grabbed a hold of its heel and came along with it out the womb. But it's not war or revolt that drives this fear. It's an unexpected visit from wise men, asking about a baby that's battling rashes and still in the stages of teething. This puts Jerusalem in a state of fear. Take a trip back with me. I imagine it as if it was on a Wednesday and Herod was having one of his famous dinner parties. The table was set with so much food, and around the table were dignitaries from all over. A party may be a loose term to say, because what they actually did was sit and listen to Herod tell stories and talk about the future plans of Jerusalem. And in the midst of Herod's grand speech, they hear that interrupts him. They can't see who is at the door, but from their accents, they wonder if they're from the Decapolis or even as far as Persia. They hear some greetings of highs and hellos, but the first thing that they hear them ask is the king here? Is the king of the Jews here? This is a palace that the king would be here, right? The guests quickly turn and look at Herod, and what seemed as if he was enjoying himself before, it's all wiped off his face. See, if you look deep within his eyes, you see anger and hate building up. And one by one, the guests began to make excuses to leave what had become an awkward moment. And as each guest left the party, fear began to spread all over Jerusalem. Fear. It makes you wonder what it is that Herod himself is fearing. Maybe after hearing that there's a king of the Jews coming, that they will rise up and start a revolt. Or maybe it's his power and control. Because if we know anything, it's that those who are in power seek to remain in power. Maybe Herod thinks that someone finally figured it out. That all this time he's just been faking being a king. He just has the title, but he really doesn't know what the demands are. He really doesn't know what it means to be a king. Or maybe it's just as simple as someone from far off talking about changes that will be happening in his nation that he did not authorize. And you would think that the citizens of Jerusalem would be excited, would be rejoicing that Herod is finally gone. But they too are in fear. Perhaps it's the case that when the psychotic king is in anxiety, the entire nation is in anxiety with him. See, they've seen Herod when he's anxious. They've seen him kill his mother-in-law, his favorite wife, and 3 of his sons. They've seen Herod when he's in fear. But they don't fear for their lives. They fear for their livelihood. They fear the changes that will have to take place if a new king comes and takes control. They've already learned how to appease Herod. They already know what he wants. They already know his demands. And now they'll have to change their habits and learn new ways just to deal with this new king. What's the point? As George once said, some would rather live with the devil they know than one they don't. And all kings have devilish ways, right? What's interesting is fear by its very nature is not negative. Fear is a natural response to physical and emotional danger. If we didn't feel it, we couldn't protect ourselves from different threats. And in fact, it's being in this state that has probably saved our species in knowing fight or flight responses. Sometimes fear isn't all bad, but it's the actions that we attach to the emotion that makes it negative or positive. For instance, in Herod's fear, he sends out a decree of death. In Jerusalem's fear, they do nothing. But by doing nothing still adds to the violence. It makes you wonder, what is it that one group welcomed, the wise men, and the others resisted? What was it that Jerusalem and Herod really feared? A couple of months ago, I was invited by Jill and Larry Granberry to go and see The Mountaintop. It's a fictitious play on the last day of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life, set at the Lorraine Motel. And in one scene, the motel maid comes up and she says, "Martin, what's the point of all this? Why is it so important to you to get all different races to come together and to find peace among them? I bet you can't tell me one thing that is within all people." Martin thought for a bit. He sat down, and as he thought, my mind began to wander. Maybe this will be the time that the author will throw in some type of scientific implications or even some type of theological studies. But he stood back up and he said, "Fear. What's innate in all human beings is fear. More specifically, the fear of change." A few scenes later, we find out that this motel maid is no ordinary maid, but she's actually an angel here to direct Martin from one side to the next. And what's fascinating is after he had just gave this grand speech about the fear of change and how so many have traumatic experiences with change, she tells him that change was about to happen in his life. And as soon as he hears this, he gives every excuse why change must not happen, every excuse why this can't happen within him. This is supposed to happen within society. But isn't that how it works? We all want change in our society, in our communities, but when it's time for change to come within ourselves, the only thing changing is our emotions and attitudes from joy to fear. Yeah, we want change, but not at the cost of us having to change. Jerusalem, Herod, and the wise men are all challenged by the birth of Christ. Two are threatened by Jesus and gain fear from the changes that will be brought. And I know on most Epiphany Sundays we talk about the wise men and how every other church has posted up on their sign, "Wise men still seek him." And that's true. But what's also true is that we're more like Herod and all of Jerusalem than we are like the pagan Gentile astrologers that actually seek and find Jesus. As Kierkegaard put it, what moved all of heaven and earth completely leaves us unmoved. Why? Because we like power, control, structure, order, not change and undetermined routes. We're like Herod in the case where we'll rather just sit and live in the midst of fear. Because through Jesus' coming, he brought along with him change, and with that change, Jesus is a savior, but he also becomes a threat to our lives. Jesus threatens our power, control, and societal expectations that have been settled within us for years. The call to love them, disrupt my social standing, the need to find a space and room for them can get in the way of those who have been here for years and years. And I get it, y'all. Because Christ has come, he calls us into some of the most impossible demands. Demands that our strength may not feel up to or our hearts can surely endure. And to be honest, it's so much easier to live and obey the Herods of our time than it is to live into the change of Christ. But I wonder, if these demands, if these changes seem difficult and impossible because we've become so comfortable with waiting. In a world where massacres come weekly, homelessness and hunger is at an all-time high, and there is constant abuse of people and systems, when the answers are kill them, disregard them, and leave them, it appears as if we've been waiting for years. It appears as if we've been in the season of Advent for years. Like Jerusalem, we are in a state of fear. And what in the world do we do with fear? We mimic the wise men. While fear was implanted into the world, they sought the one who would bring them joy. And we shall do the same, seek the one who will bring us hope and love and peace and joy. Together we consciously walk in faith toward changes, toward shifting terrain, toward challenges. And I hate to tell you this, but we aren't in Advent any longer. Christ already came and brought so much of what we need, and now it's not us waiting on God, but God waiting on us. And I tell you, it's a good thing God is eternal, because it's going to take a long time, because we're Baptists and we don't like change. But God's waiting on us to search within ourselves, search within each other, search within our world so that we might impact the world around us. Don't let the fear of changes, the fear of undetermined routes, the fear of impossible demands stop you. But if that begins to cloud your perspective, if that begins to cloud your vision, think about this. Think about the fear of those if change does not happen. The fear they may live with day to day if we do not participate in bringing the kingdom of heaven here on earth. And what I hope comforts you is as we lean into these changes, as we begin to see the presence of God through it all, the joy and the fear, but what I hope challenges you. It's not just to seek, not just to see, but also to participate in this presence of God. Because as we do slowly and slowly, we begin to understand Emmanuel. God is with us. Recently, we had One Starry Night, an interactive Bethlehem experience. And I had the honor of playing one of the worst characters in the New Testament, other than Jezebel and the Beast. I got to be King Herod. And I spoke with Leanne and Julie Owens, and Julie said, "Do you notice anything about King Herod's palace that she had painted?" And I said, "I'm not too good with details when it comes to art." And she said, "Look right above the throne." And there was a window. And inside the window, there was a little building. And inside the building were two people sitting there. And she looked up and smiled at me, and she said, "If only Herod would have just turned around, maybe he would have saw baby Jesus." After she said that, I thought to myself, if only Herod would have maybe changed his perspective, maybe it just turned his perspective just a little bit, he would have saw not the baby Jesus that he wanted to kill, but the Messiah that came to change the world. Toward whom do you need to change your perspective to today? Maybe it's toward Christ, maybe it's a certain life situation, or maybe it's a group of people, but either way, we still have time to see the Messiah. We still have time to be agents of change and transformation that Christ brings, even to us in a state of fear. Amen.